Tribune's The Shelf Life. I'm Mandira. I'm a journalist who reads for a living, and I'm here. I'm very excited to welcome The Shelf Life, um, one of the leading writers and the best-selling novelist, Ken Follett. He was a young reporter in a small newspaper, and he wrote 10 books till his biggest book, Eye of the Needle, became a bestseller. It's a dream all journalists have, right, to write best-selling books, but Ken Follett did this. And congratulations on your new book, The Circle of Days. So here I am, with really a legend. So I hope this is going to be an interesting half an hour. And I just want to ask you it straight off. Circle of Days is a book which is set in Neolithic times, much before the script was written. You've talked about how people carried traditions in songs, but yet you've sort of written a racy thriller. So how did you get in the skin of these characters really, and how did they come to you?
Well, I think some things people have in common in every age of history. Of course, our circumstances, yours and mine, are very different from those of Stone Age people. Our houses, our food, everything material is different, but certain things are the same. And here's some examples. In every age of history, people worry about the family, the children. Are we going to be able to feed our children? Uh, does my wife love me? Does my husband love me? Or if it's not a wife or a husband, some other. We worry about the family and children. We and money. We worry about money. We also worry a lot about violence. People worry about violence, crime, and war, and and people worry about love and sex, and
And you've got
falling in
one
love with the
match.
wrong person.
Yes.
And so, if you write about these very fundamental things in human life, then the story can take place in any period of history. These things, people worried about these things in Shakespeare's time and in the Middle Ages and in the Roman Empire and all the way back to the Stone Age and probably before the Stone Age. So I think that's the other thing about this, of course, is that people in different parts of the world
Hmm.
whose lives may be very different. A lot of my books take place in Western Europe, but they're loved by people in China and Brazil, and I'm happy to say in India, uh,
Audience in India.
where life is different. And even though the reader's own life is different materially, readers will always sympathize with somebody who has these concerns that are pretty much universal to the human race.
Yeah. I mean, I thought, in many ways, the book is it's story oriented and which is why I asked you this question, because, if you look at all the others, you have tropes, you have things that you can sort of propel the book. You have, let's say, like in an oil painting, you have the varnish, you have the background, right? You have stuff. In this case, it's only the story. Here they are wearing hide. There is, you're talking about hunger, you're talking about herding, you're talking about farming, you're talking about other things, but you've got a story. So how do you sort of then place a character where it's just bare bone and it's driven really by all the universal needs, and how does that character come in? How do you think of names like the names that you did? How do you sort of imagine?
Well, the idea for this story is that it would be a novel about the people who built Stonehenge. So clearly, there are two characters. It was obvious to me from the start that there were two essential characters, one a man and one a woman. Now, the man is in Circle of Days is called Seft, and he is an engineer. He's a very
Yeah,
talented engineer, and
yeah.
he's the one who must solve the many problems that arise when these people try to move a giant stone. And so he's Seft. And the other thing is when they're trying to move this stone, the in the Stone Age there were no carts because they didn't have the wheel.
Yeah. Yeah. So you
And also, they had not come up with the idea of getting horses and cattle to pull things for them.
this is
And
such a
so
human.
these 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 things have to be these stones have to be moved by human beings, and uh, it takes hundreds of human beings to move a giant stone. So this is a social movement, and it needs a leader. So there must be a character, and Joya is this character who has charisma. She says to people, hey, let's all go to Westwood and we're going to find the biggest stone in the world and we're going to bring it here. And they go, yeah, let's go tomorrow. Now, if I said that to people, they'd say, oh, come on, Follett, forget it. We've got better things to do. We're busy, Follett. They
Mhm.
wouldn't follow me. I know that. But we do know, don't we?
Without reading your book, so maybe they will follow you.
Well, we do know at any rate that there are certain people who can get a crowd to follow them. I mean,
Yeah.
and not always it can this power that some people have can be used for good or bad. You can get a crowd of people to march on the Capitol in Washington and try and overturn the election if you've got that kind of. But anyway, so Joya uses this power that she has for good to get people to build Stonehenge. So those two characters really came from the story. They had to be, they had to have those talents. Her talent for getting people to follow her, his talent for solving engineering
Yeah.
problems.
No, I also think I also what I also found interesting is that there's a man and a woman, and the relationship isn't a romantic one, and I think that is also an interesting part of the book. And I just wanted to ask you, you've been interested in monuments and big buildings. So the Pillars of the Earth, you talk about building a cathedral. You talk about how it takes about 30 years, and this book is also about, as you said, social movement, power of good, people wanting to come together, and about ritualism, about a power greater than us, in this case the sun god. um, do you think, how does I mean, it's about faith, it's about being passionate. How much of that plays out in your personal life, and how does, and what you've sort of been interested in places of faith and how they've come up. So how does that play out in your own life?
Well, the first part of your question, Seth and Joya don't have a romance, and that's really just because I thought it was too obvious.
Yeah.
uh, and a bit of a cliche, and I don't think readers would get excited about it. So both Seth and Joya have romances,
For
but
each other.
not with each other. They have
Yeah.
romances with different people. And this is very important because I want you to begin to care about these characters as if they were real. And that's the magic of literature, isn't it? We read a book, if it's well written and if we're enjoying it, we begin to have hopes and fears about the fictional characters. We hope things are going to go well for them. We're afraid things will go wrong. And when we have that emotional reaction to the fictional story, that's when the writer has done a good job. And that's when we really enjoy the book. So Seth, of course, Seth does have a romance, and it's right at the beginning of the story.
Yeah.
And he has a very unhappy home life. His mother is dead. His father is cruel.
Hmm.
He's the
Yes.
youngest of the brothers, and they're mean to him. And he not only does he meet an adorable girl, well, he thinks she's adorable anyway,
Yes.
and she
He
thinks he's
thinks this
pretty
is
nice too.
adorable too.
And
Neat.
then he meets her family, and that his family are part of what she falls in love with because she sees a family in which people love one another. They're nice to one another. Nobody bullies
Yeah.
anybody. So um uh so and the fact that we I want you to care about Seft, but in the story, the woman he wants to marry cares about him. And so through her eyes, we see how lovable Seft is. So that
Hmm.
it's not me telling you that he's lovable. It's a
Showing you.
character in the story telling you that he's
Hmm.
lovable, which is much more convincing. And the same thing with Joya. Somebody falls in love with her. She's thrilled. It's wonderful. And then we see that there's somebody in the story who appreciates how what a wonderful woman Joya is, and that makes us appreciate it. So that's why there's always at least one love story in my books, and often more than one. And that's because the love story is an important factor in making you sympathize with the characters as if they were real people.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I thought that's this thing, but I think so. And what about the second question about faith?
Well, these things, if you're going to write about history, um, you've got to get into every side of people's lives. And people did believe in the Stone Age, in gods, hunter-gatherers. There are hunter-gatherers in the world today, and they generally believe that there are spirits in everything around them. There's a spirit in the stream, there's a spirit in the tree, and so on. And that's their religion. And yeah, I mean, you can't, and the both the farmers and the herders worship the sun god, and
Hmm.
you can't pour scorn on these things. If you want to write empathetically about these people, you have to accept their religion, even if you don't believe in it. And same thing in the Middle Ages. What the idea it was very important to the builders of the cathedrals that they were building it for God. One time I was on the roof of Peterborough Cathedral in this country. I
Hmm.
was on the roof, and cathedrals all have high up. They have pinnacles,
Hmm.
which are, I mean, they're they're about 4 or 5 feet high, and they're very decorated. They're carved with little crotchets and so on. And when I was up on the roof, I saw that some crotchets had been replaced in the 1950s with new ones, and the new ones weren't decorated. They were quite plain. From the ground, the new ones looked exactly the same as the old ones. And so obviously in the 1950s, people said, look, it doesn't matter. These things don't need to be decorated because you can't even see them from the ground. And so they put a cheap substitute. In the Middle Ages, they never did that because God could see it. So you see, the fact that they were doing this
Yeah.
for God means that they took just as much trouble over the
Hmm.
decoration of something that most people would never see, because God could see it. And you see these things are absolutely crucial to the story. Now, as everybody knows, I'm not a believer. I don't believe in God. But I'm a writer and an imaginative writer, and I write about people who believe in God, and it means that I've got to take them seriously. There would be no point in me pouring scorn on these ideas, because it would make the book sort of rather unpleasant. So you have to embrace those things. If I'm writing about people who believed in something, then the book must take that belief very seriously.
So that's why I was asking you. There is obviously, but there is an aspect of faith that pulls you, even if you're not a believer. You grew up in a very in a believing house, this thing, and you didn't
Yes.
watch television. You sort of only read. How much of that sort of informs your life? How does it? I mean, in some ways, it's sort of you're writing about. You grew up with belief, and you're writing about believers. So how does that really work out?
Well, it means, I mean, one of the things was that we read the Bible every day, the Christian Bible and the Jewish Bible. In our house, everybody read them every day. Now, it so happens that the King James translation of the Jewish and Christian Bible is very well written, because there were several translators, and one of them in particular was a very good writer. So we have these wonderful phrases in the Bible, and they resonate, these phrases, and the way the Bible is written is very expressive. And that was part. I absorbed all that in my childhood. Of course, I don't write like that. Can't write that well, to be honest. But nevertheless, it's the same as reading Shakespeare when you're a teenager. You may not. I mean, there's a lot you don't understand in Shakespeare when you read him. Well, not just as a teenager. Read Shakespeare as an adult, and there are a few things that you don't understand. But the power of the
Yeah.
words and the poetry of Shakespeare, it becomes part of yourself. You don't have to memorize it. You don't really have to study it. If you read it, you just absorb it. So all of that. So and then of course the fact that I was not allowed to watch TV. Well, we didn't have a TV, and I was not allowed to go to the movies on Saturday mornings when they had special movies for kids. And so I went to the public library. And so really my upbringing was very much based on words and reading rather than images and television and cinema. And as things turned out, that was quite good for me.
Yes, it does. And I wanted to ask you, you say that you talk about being about writing and literature and the power of literature. And I think I've read you quote one of your agents who says that you are not a tortured writer. You're not but you're a best-selling writer. And I wanted to ask you the difference between do you necessarily can a best-selling writer also be a tortured writer, or do you must best-selling writers sort of squash that tortured soul, tortured writer bit because you have to write not only for yourself but as to keep the story moving. You have to be a popular writer, and it's not. And can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. Well, it's true that what we sometimes call literary fiction does not usually sell very well, although there are exceptions. There's an American writer, I'm pretty sure he's dead now, called Philip Roth, and
Of course.
he was a very literary writer, but his books sold very well. He had such a powerful way of taking you into the lives of people. In his case, nearly always Jewish people, taking you into their lives and making you feel as if you were living there. But that's unused. There's a writer at the moment, a Swedish writer whose books are bestsellers, and I read his most recent one. It's called My Friends, and it's a it's a story about young people, and all of the principal young people in the story are being mistreated or abused in some way. Now, that's not a formula for a bestseller.
Hmm.
Abused children, it's that you don't want to take that on the plane with you.
Yeah.
Um, but when it's done with such energy and such verbal ability that it draws you in, then everybody likes it. And that's why Frederick Backman's books are very popular, although they belong to a genre which is generally unpopular. But you're right. You quoted my agent said many years ago now. We were going back 30 or 40 years now. He said to me, "Your only problem as a writer is that you're not a tortured soul." And people who are tortured souls sometimes write very powerfully. And and that's why I don't write like that, because I'm a lucky guy. I had a happy childhood despite not being allowed to go to the movies. And Barbara and I have now been married for 40 years. We had a party on Saturday to celebrate our
Congratulations, that's a
40th
long
wedding.
time.
Yes, a long time. And still very happy and still in love with one another. And and my chosen career has been very successful for me. What have I got to be tortured about? Nothing. So
So I want
and that's why the books I write aren't about, my books are not about, abused children and so on. They're adventure stories, and I never could write those agonized novels, although I read them occasionally, but I never could write those. And it's because that's not me. I always, when I was starting out as a writer, I thought, well, there are lots of possibilities. I could write literary novels. I could write thrillers. I could write television scripts, maybe film scripts, plays. And of course, the fact of the matter is there was only one thing I could write. And I learned that by trying out different kind of. I tried to write a play. I tried to write a radio play. I wrote television scripts, one of which actually was made into a TV, was an episode of a cop show, but it clearly was not my strength. And it turned out that what I could do was write popular novels that everybody liked. They're the kind of stories that I read, and and that's why I write them, because I love them. I've read those kind of books since I was about 4 years old.
Yeah.
Everything, literature in my life has been about enjoyable adventures and historical novels. I used to, when I was, 8, 9, 10, I was borrowing historical novels from the children's section of the library, and
Mm.
you think when you're 25, you think you can do anything. By the time I was 30, I knew there was basically one thing I could do well, and that's what I've done ever since. So, and it's not about pride. It's really not about money, because um, even if literary novels made more money than my kind of novel, I still couldn't write them. It's just not me.
I want to ask you, you took you had about five pseudonyms, right?
Yeah,
And because you were turning this in, you did 10 books before The Eye of the Needle. So
yeah.
50 years of writing, really, almost, and about 40 years of being married. Two things you've learned from both of those. What's the success of 50 years of writing and 40 years of being happily married?
Um, well, I think if you want to write bestsellers, the key thing is that the reader must share the emotions of the characters in the story. If we have an emotional response to a novel, then we really enjoy it and we want to turn the page and we read it all the way to the end, and then we put it down and we think that was great. And then the next thing we do is we phone our best friend and we say, "Hey, I just read this great book. You've got to read it." And and if you want that, then you have to think about the reader, and you have to think, what is the reader thinking about this? Does the reader care about this? Does the reader believe that this could actually happen? Because some books and TV shows too, they disappoint you because you're thinking to yourself, I don't think that would happen. He wouldn't do that. She wouldn't do that. And that ruins it. So you've got to believe in it, and the story has to be structured so that all the time in the back of your mind you're thinking, oh my goodness, what's going to happen next? So that's
Yeah.
for about writing successful popular fiction. I think that's the key element. Now, I'm not so confident if you're asking me to talk about marriage, um, because there's an awful lot of luck, isn't there? And I mean, you don't know when you get to 40, when you get to your 40th wedding anniversary, you can look back and think, if you wanted to kid yourself, you could think, I think that I was really smart to marry Barbara. I wasn't smart to marry, but I just fell in love with her. And
Yes.
um, and I followed my instinct, and she feels the same. She didn't look at me and think that guy would make a good husband. Um, she didn't think of anything of the kind. She just fell in love with me, and I with her. So and of course, you can fall in love with the wrong person just as easily as you can fall in love with the right person.
Mm.
And we happened to fall in love back in the 80s. We both fell in love with the right person, and that's why we're still together. But I can't pretend to be wise about this. I'm pretty smart about literature. I've been doing it all my life, and I know a bit about it. I'm not smart about marriage. I just got lucky.
So you also play the bass guitar, right?
Yeah.
Music plays a huge role. Can you talk
Yeah.
about how that this thing, and can you also talk about my next question? You interviewed Stevie Wonder when you were, wasn't that one of your first interviews when you were a journalist?
Yeah.
What was that like?
Well, it was great because First of all, I loved his music. I had loved him as an artist since he was about 13 years old because he was a very early starter in the music business. And he had an album out at that time called Music of My Mind, which was just a masterpiece. So I really admired him. And he was charming. He was very funny. And um, but he also, he wound me up a little bit. Um, I said to him, asked him about his hobbies, and he said, I like roller skating. And I was thinking, is he teasing me? Or, I mean, maybe he could roller skate with somebody holding his hand. Or I didn't want to say, oh, you can't roller skate, because you shouldn't say that to disabled people. Oh, you can't do this. They might
Yeah.
say, yes, I can. Um, and in retrospect, of course, it was a joke. He's a blind man. He can't roller skate.
Mm.
And he, he was winding me up. But I got a good article out of it. He was nice. And I saw him twice because I went to interview him and saw him that day. It was a nearby town. On the following day, he came to my town and I saw the concert again. And I thought he was just wonderful. So that was, I mean, that's probably the best interview I ever did because
Mm.
it was perfect timing. He was just, he was on a Motown tour. So
Mm.
he was only one of about 7 or 8 Motown acts who were in the show. Nowadays, it would be just him in a stadium. Wouldn't be a theater nowadays. It would be a stadium with 50,000 people, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
So it was terrific. I've never met him since. I'd quite like to meet him and say, I met you. How long ago is it? Yeah, it's 50 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. Music in my life. I got a guitar when I was 14 years old, and it was the 60s. I started playing Bob Dylan songs, blowing in the wind. I
Yeah.
could play on the
Of
guitar.
course.
Uh, and um, and my family is quite musical. My father was a good pianist, and there's always a piano in the house. And I taught myself a few things on the piano. I learned a few songs on the guitar, and eventually, and I taught my brother a few chords, my kid brother, and he within a very short time he was a much better player than me, and he's
Mm.
been a professional guitarist most of his life. Um, and my son was uh, I also taught him a few chords. He then became much better than me also very quickly.
Yeah.
So it's in the family, and in fact, I'm seeing my brother tonight, and we're going to spend the evening, playing together. I play the bass now. He's a very good
Yeah.
lead guitarist. We play
Yeah.
stuff together. We're both
Yeah.
in a band together. And
It's
tomorrow,
wonderful.
the band is coming to my house to rehearse and we have a gig in London in February. So, and the thing about it is, it's so different from writing that it's relaxing for me. Writing is very cerebral. You're always plotting. You're always thinking, well, if I get this person to do this, how will it affect everybody else in the story? And that's what it's about, of course. But you concentrate on that. When you're playing in a band, you have to do it. You have to do it sort of automatically. If you're thinking to yourself, what's the next note? You'll make a mistake.
Mm.
You just have to know the song well enough to just play it without thinking about the notes. And you got to play thinking how the band sounds,
Yeah.
not where are my fingers going next. Your fingers have to move automatically. And I always think there's a connection from the ear to the fingertips that does not pass through the brain. It's sort
Mm.
of automatic.
Yeah.
And so I enjoy it enormously.
And any Stevie Wonder's songs in your set?
Well, we play Superstition sometimes.
Hmm.
Um, uh, um, there are, I mean, it's to do a Stevie Wonder song is really kind of, it's pretty bold because there is something about not just his voice, but the way he plays the piano. It's not usually a piano, it's usually some kind of synthesizer. Anyway, the keyboard instruments. And he, it's, I sometimes think it's a bit of a mistake to play Stevie Wonder songs because you can't do it like him. And if you don't do it like him, it's not so good. he's hard to imitate. Some people are easy to imitate, you know. Some you can play blues and you can play Rolling Stones songs. The Beatles are a bit, you've got to be very careful with the Beatles because the voices.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I'm not that keen on playing Stevie Wonder songs. I mean, in a sense, it's because he's too good.
So what next? My last question.
Well, I finished Circle of Days a year ago, and I've been writing a new book ever since. Uh, but my publishers won't let me talk about the new book because they want to make in about a year's time, when the book's finished and they're getting ready to publish it, they'll make an announcement. And it will be, you know, they'll do a press release and it'll be a little news story. Ken Follett's new book. This is what it's called. This is what it's about. This is the cover of the book. It's coming out on such and such a date. And if I start talking about it now, I'll spoil their press release.
As long as you're
Everybody say,
writing and
"Oh,
there's a next new Ken Follett around the corner. Thank you so much. Thank you, B, for talking to the Tribune's shelf life. Thank you. Have a good day.
it's been a pleasure. Thank you for having
Thank you,
me.
and I hope the rehearsal goes well. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Congratulations,
Thanks,
Ken.
man.